Welcome to episode 58 of the CRM MVP podcast. My name is Megan Walker and I'm a Microsoft Business Applications MVP. I'm a blogger and also a video creator. Today I'm really excited to be getting to talk to you about Forms Pro. So if you've been paying any attention on social media, if you've been looking at any of the release information from Microsoft recently, you will have seen that Forms Pro was released and made generally available July 1st of 2019. So you might have heard of Forms. So this is basically taking Forms and really putting it on steroids. It's basically making it more powerful, creating more features and functionality, and really making it possible for you to analyze your customer feedback and be able to see how to improve your organization just by using Forms Pro and collecting feedback from customers and also leads as well. So the reason I started looking into it is because I was working on a project that needed voice of the customer, and that's what had been demoed, that's what had been presented. Now, I really love voice of the customer. It still exists, so I'm not going to say loved past tense. So it still exists. It has been announced that it will be deprecated. You've got about a year or so before you have to kind of worry about moving away from it and onto something else, hopefully Forms Pro. So like I said, on this project, and that's what we'd started to kind of to look at. We weren't ready to implement just yet, so that was fine. But when I saw Forms Pro was in public preview, I wanted to take a look, and when you put two and two together, it was fairly obvious that Microsoft were going in a slightly different direction and that Forms Pro was most likely going to be the way that they were moving forward. Therefore, voice of the customer didn't really have a place to go alongside it. So I wanted to dig into it, figure out what it could do. Unintentionally, I found a gap in terms of any sort of content, any sort of blogs, videos. There wasn't anything else out there that people were writing about, so I just started writing more and more. So now I've got about 21 different blogs and still got quite a few more to go that cover how to do things with Forms Pro. Not only Forms Pro, but other tools that we can use from the Microsoft stack to really kind of play together and provide a greater, richer experience. So that to me is why it's exciting. I think it's something that organizations should pay attention to. There are obviously a lot of different survey tools out there, but there's some really key things about Forms Pro that if you're using Microsoft stack of any sort of products in the stack, you're going to want to know about how this will work for you. So for this specific episode, what I'm going to cover is what I think are the top 10 features and business benefits that Microsoft Forms Pro will bring to an organization. What is it that you can truly do with it? So let's go ahead and we'll get started. So this top 10 list isn't really in a specific order. By that I mean, well, I've tried to put it in a fairly logical order, but there are going to be some things that actually tie in with each other to where I could have put one before the other. So even though, yes, I'm starting at number 10, doesn't mean that that one's less important than any of the others. I had to come up with some kind of order. So as we're going through them, what you'll start to see is, oh, actually, I could take that feature or benefit and I could tie it in with another one. So many cool things that we can do with Forms Pro. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so number 10. Number 10 is sending surveys to contacts. Sounds pretty straightforward, sounds pretty basic, but there's so many cool different ways that you can actually send out your surveys to contacts. All right, so the first one is your surveys will all have a direct link, a URL that you can then click on and get taken to the survey. So you can send that URL to somebody. That's cool, simplest of ways to be able to do it. You can also get a QR code. So once you've created the survey and you go to send the survey, you'll have an option to get a QR code which you can download. Now, if you're not familiar with a QR code, you've probably seen them on things, marketing material, Other websites, people might put them in their presentations at events, and it's basically a square, and within that square you've got a bunch of smaller little squares that kind of is making up a pattern. But when you take a picture of that with your phone or scan it with a QR code reader, that will then take you on your phone to that URL. So you'll be able to take a picture of your QR code with your phone and then be taken directly to the survey. So you could use that at an event. So let's say you're doing some kind of job fair or some kind of marketing event, and at a stand you've maybe got something with a QR code that you could put onto some kind of poster or brochure or something like that. Then people can go ahead and just snap a picture and get taken to the survey and maybe provide feedback. How was the event? How was the job fair? That kind of thing. Now, the next thing to me is really, really cool. There's a built-in integration with Office 365. So what that means is when you've created your survey and you go to actually send that survey out, you can go ahead, just like you would send an email, and you would go into the to field and you would go ahead and start typing John Smith, then John Smith will show up as an option to be able to pick and then send that survey to. So that's really, really cool. I don't have to go and find John Smith's email from somewhere. I can just type in his name, and if he's in my Office 365 contacts list, I will be able to find him and send him an email with a survey. The other thing, if you're using Dynamics 365 Customer Engagement or CRM, then you can go ahead and you can search for contacts that are in your CRM system. So again, if John Smith is a contact in CRM, I can go ahead, type John Smith, and he will show up, and I can go ahead and send him an email with a link to take the survey. Really, really cool. What that also means is if I do it that way and I'm picking that specific John Smith from CRM, then when I send out the survey and he fills out that survey, the response that comes back will be linked to his record. So really, really cool. Another thing that you can do is you can go ahead and you can send a survey to a view. So if you think about your marketing lists that you might be using now, so you're building up your marketing lists, you're doing it one of two ways. You're either creating the search criteria from within the marketing list itself, or perhaps you're already creating your view using Advanced Find first of all and then saving it or using a system view. So this is, forget about the marketing list, but you've got your view with your criteria. And then when you go to send the survey, you can search on the name of the view and then pick that, and it will send the survey out to all of the people that have found essentially the results of that view. So again, another really cool way, especially from somebody for somebody that works in marketing. You don't necessarily know who the people are that should get the survey, but you know the criteria. You know what it should be that they've got on their profile. So maybe they've said they're interested in getting information about specific products or specific surveys. You could search for that view and send them out a survey based on a specific product. So really, really cool integration there with Dynamics 365 Customer Engagement to allow you to go ahead and send that survey to a view. That to me is really, really cool. Another option you've got is to be able to send surveys by uploading a CSV file of contacts. Now when you do that, and you go through the process, it will tell you what you need as a minimum within that file. So you need to have email address, first name and last name, and they need to be in that specific order in terms of the column. So 1, 2, 3, email, first name, last name. You can also do it, it's got to be in sort of blocks or bulk files of 100 maximum in terms of the contacts. So if you need to send it out to more than that, then you'll just obviously put it in multiple different CS files until you get to the number you need to send it to. So that's quite a few different ways in terms of sending out your surveys to contacts that you already know. So again, you've got the Office 365 integration, you've got the Dynamics 365 customer engagement integration. You can send surveys one at a time to contacts, send surveys using views, send surveys uploading a CSV file. So number 10, that's pretty cool. Sending surveys to contacts in many different ways. All right, let's move on to number 9. Number 9 is branching rules. So Branching rules are basically logic or conditions that you can set on the survey to guide the users through that process, either guiding them to specific questions or deciding where they go after they've completed the survey, or deciding if they should have another survey to complete after the first one, all kinds of different things. So from the Forms Pro perspective, they've called that branching rules. So once you've created your survey, you're going to have an ellipsis, which is basically the 3 dots. So if you click on the ellipsis from the top of your survey, you'll have the option that you'll see in a drop down, and that will be for branching rules. So you basically go through and add conditions. So the condition would be if a specific question has been answered. So the conditions are all about questions. So it's, has a question been answered? Or does a question equal a specific value? Or does a question not equal that value? Is there a question that's really they need to have a number as an answer? Does that number, is it greater than or less than a specific number? So for that kind of thing, you could consider a question where you're asking someone to give a rating on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever that might be. So your condition might be, if the score is less than or equal to 3, then I want to do something about that. I want to have some kind of next steps that will happen if that condition is met. So if the condition is met, no matter what that condition might be, and you can actually set up multiple conditions, so you could have an and or an or type condition. If the condition's met, you can determine what will happen. If the condition is not met, something else could happen. So, for example, we could have a question that if the question is answered, then you could say, right, we'll show another question after that. So, for example, we could have a question that says, are you willing to give us more feedback after this survey? Because we want to gather information about what you think about a specific product. If they say yes, we could then show another question. If they say no, then that's fine. Maybe we don't show another set of questions. So you can determine what will happen. So we can show or hide questions. We can also do if the condition is met, we can navigate to something specific. So again, based on a condition being met, somebody answered a question a specific way, we can then navigate to another question. So we could say, right, well, if they answer question 1 in a certain way, we could then take them directly to question 4, because maybe questions 2 and 3 are just not relevant to that person. So we can navigate to questions. We could also navigate to the end of the survey. So you've got the first couple of questions, and the person's almost qualified themselves out of that survey. It's not relevant to them. So rather than forcing them to go through the entire set of questions, we can actually say, send them to the end of the survey if this happens. Another thing that's really cool, so what I said in terms of if somebody says they're willing to answer another survey, then what we can do is we can do what's called chained surveys. So that's basically the branching rule where we're saying if a condition's met, then what we do is we basically say send them to another survey directly after this. So what'll happen is they'll fill out the questions and answer the questions for survey A. They'll submit that and immediately they'll go on to survey B. And then when they finish that, then you can decide, well, are they done? What happens after that? Do we then send them to another survey? You don't want to give them too many surveys to complete because someone's going to get a bit irritated after a couple. But if you are going to send them on to another survey, you really want to have a question that asks if that's okay. Are you willing to do that? You might have seen that when you've been on a website, or actually I've had that happen on a phone call where it says, if after you've spoken to the customer service representative, are you willing to answer a survey for us, press 1. So when you've finished and the survey, the representative has hung up with you, then you'll be taken on and it'll be some kind of survey that's over the phone. So it's that sort of approach. Another thing you can do, which is good for taking your customer back to your website, so keeping them on a journey that's all about you and your organization, is when they've completed the survey, you can have a branching rule that basically says, if somebody completes the survey, when somebody's answered the final question, then let's go ahead and navigate them to a URL. So your URL might be a thank you page. So the default survey, when they finished it, it just says thank you within the survey itself. This one will basically redirect them to a URL, and your URL could be a very nicely set up thank you page. It could have more information about other products. It could be something that shows what events are coming up, that kind of thing. So consider doing branching rules to be able to continue the journey on for the customer, and or make sure that you don't ask irrelevant questions based on responses to questions within that survey. Use the branching rules to take them on that journey. All right, number 8. So we're going to look at multilingual surveys and emails. So when you create your survey, you're going to be creating it in your main language, so whatever you've got set up for your environment. So for me, it would be English. But I've got the ability to add additional language to that. So adding them is really easy. So we just talked about branching rules. You're going to see the ellipsis from the top right of your survey. When you click on that, you'll also see multilingual survey. You'll see that information. So when you click on that, you basically search for the language. So I might search for French, I might search for German. When you've added on those additional languages, you're going to be able to, there'll be a little pencil icon, you can click on that to edit it. Now what's really cool is you'll see the default language that will be shown, but then you'll see a field underneath that, and that's where you'll go ahead and add in the translation. So fortunately, you will need to know that language, or use Google Translate at your peril if you think it's accurate, but you will put in those translations. So you want to consider all of the areas for the translation, not just the question, but also if you have any kind of subtitle underneath that. If you've got some kind of rating question and you've got something like dissatisfied, slightly dissatisfied, average, and so on, you'll want to translate all of those as well. So make sure you've translated the entire survey. When you then view the survey, you're going to get a drop-down menu where you can click on that and it will show a language picker, so I can select the French or select the German. However, the intention is that the person that's receiving a link to the survey, it'll be based on the browser language setting that they have. So if you're using Google Chrome or Edge, whatever, there's a setting that says, well, what is my preferred language? So if I have my setting as French and I get a link to click on to show that survey, it will be displayed in French if that language translation has been set up. Now, if you want emails to go out, so if you're sending out an email to a contact to say, hey, can you complete this survey for us? You will have to create a template in each of those languages that you want to be able to send it out in. So it's not going to translate the email, and there's no option at the minute to be able to take one email template and translate it into multiple languages. You will have to create a different template for each language that you want to be able to send that out in. So in terms of sending the right email out with the right language, more on that a little bit later on one of the other tips that we've got, or one of the other features that we're going to talk about. So that was number 8. That's multilingual surveys and emails. Very important can be more important to you depending on the customer base that you have and if you work with customers across different countries. So otherwise, if you're fine with it just being in your default language, that's all you need to worry about. So let's move on. Okay, number 7, we're going to look at embedding surveys in websites. So we've talked about how you can send out your survey and sending out in an email, and that will basically have a link in the email and they'll click on the link and then it'll be taken to the survey. But you might have a need to display a form on a website. So this could be within a Microsoft Dynamics portal, for example, or maybe you've got a form you've set up that you want to use to capture leads and you want to embed it into your website. You might have an event and you want people to be able to fill out the form to sign up for an event. So there's a lot of different reasons as to why having that form on your website might be a good idea, might be going to be what you're looking for. So there's a couple of different ways in terms of how you can embed your form onto your website. So the easiest and simplest, and probably the way that you're going to use most of all, I would imagine, is to embed it in line. So basically that means you've got an iframe that you're putting on your website. Now what happens is when you're on the survey and you go to send the survey, there's an option to embed. And then what you'll see is 3 different options. So if you were to click on the inline one, then what you'll see at the very bottom of the page is where you can generate the code. And then you'll basically copy that code and be able to paste it into your website. Now, there's a little bit more to it. Unfortunately, it's not quite as clear on that page as one might hope. So it's not really something I can explain just on a podcast. But if you go to my website, meganvwalker.com, and search for Embed, or just go to any of the Forms Pro ones, search for that, you'll be able to see exactly how to do it and exactly what code you need to be able to embed it. Now, what you can also do is you can pass through parameters to pass context into the code. So for example, let's say that we've got one survey, and that survey is just to capture lead information, and it's going to be placed on a several different pages, and each page is going to be about a specific service or a specific product or an event that you have going on, and you want someone to be able to fill out that form. What we can do is we can use a parameter such as product name or service name or event name, and then when we put the code on each of those individual pages, we can then put in what that product name is that page is all about, or even what the page name is or the event name and so on. So we can do that, and then when someone fills out the field, we can capture that information, create a lead from it, and be able to know exactly where they were when they filled out that page. The other 2 options we've got is we've got a pop-up, and that will display the survey in a pop-up window on your page, and then the other one is a button, so that will be displayed on the bottom right corner of your web page, and when the button is selected, it'll pop up like you will have seen on other websites where it says give us feedback or how can we help you. So someone will click on it, it'll pop up, and it will show that survey for someone to complete. So 3 different methods in terms of embedding the surveys onto your website. And again, like I said, it's not just your corporate company website, but you could also have something embedded in your Dynamics portal as well if you are using that. So let's move on to number 6. Okay, so number 6 is one that I'm extremely passionate about, and that is Net Promoter Score. If you have followed my blog at all for a while, you will have seen that I'll have done blog posts about Net Promoter Score in the past, and this was done with Voice of the Customer. I have also updated it so that you can see how to use Net Promoter Score with your organization and also Forms Pro. So if you're not sure, what is Net Promoter Score? So Net Promoter Score, or NPS for short, is a customer loyalty metric, and it was developed by a few people. Hopefully I will say their names right. Fred Reichheld, Bain & Company, and Sapmetrics, and that was in 2003. So the NPS is calculated based on responses to a single question, and that's on a scale from 0 to 10, and it's important that it's 0 to 10 and not 1 to 10. And you'll have seen this on surveys yourself. You'll have received a survey when you've gone to a coffee shop, or when you've bought a new car, or when you've purchased something in a shop, and they want to know how likely is it that you would recommend our company, our product or service to a friend or colleague. So you'll get that question. Typically it's the last question on a survey. And then you'll fill that out, and that is used to calculate an organization's Net Promoter Score. So how is it calculated? So based on the responses, the customers are going to be classed as one of the following 3 types of NPS. So if you give a 9 or a 10, then you're a promoter. You're someone who will continue to buy from that organization. You will refer an organization. You'll promote an organization. So think of your promoters. They're going to be your happiest clients or customers. They're the ones that would go on social media and say, oh my God, I just had the best experience. This person is amazing. This company is amazing. You should go there. You should use this product, whatever that might be. So they're your promoters. If somebody gives a 7 or an 8, they are passive. They're satisfied, but they're unenthusiastic. So that means they could easily be swayed by your competition. So there's still people to kind of look out for and make sure that you can turn things around and make them happy. And then finally, the detractors, they're the ones that give a score of 0 to 6. So detractor is an unhappy customer. They can damage your brand and they can impede the growth of your brand or organization through negative word of mouth. So they are the ones that will tell their 10 friends how bad your service is or how poor the product is. They are the ones that will go on social media and tell the world how crap you are. So detractors and passives as well need to be paid attention to. And actually, for that matter, promoters do as well, because you want to thank them and maybe reward them for giving you positive feedback. All right, so then what happens is the Net Promoter Score formula gives you the actual Net Promoter Score itself. So the score can range from a low of -100, and that would be all detractors, to a high of 100, which would be all promoters. You're very unlikely to get either of those at all. But you would take the percentage of the promoters and we subtract the percentage of the detractors, and that gives us our Net Promoter Score. Now, how does that work with Forms Pro? So one of the question types that you can add to a survey is a Net Promoter Score type. So again, that will be that question, how likely is it that you would recommend us to a friend or colleague? And then someone can fill that out. Now that's great. That gives you a Net Promoter Score, but what that gives you, and it uses that calculation of percentage of promoters minus percentage of detractors, but it gives it for the survey itself. So if you consider you might have 10, 20 surveys, you're going to have 10 or 20 different Net Promoter Scores. Now that might be fine in terms of, let's say the customer services manager has a survey, they see the Net Promoter Score for their area of the business, an account manager sees it for their area of the business, and so on. But what you really need is an overall Net Promoter Score. So again, I've done stuff on my website that shows you how to use it for your entire organization, but having the ability to put this Net Promoter Score on your surveys and not have to worry about any of those calculations is a really cool feature, and definitely one, if you're not already using Net Promoter Score for your organization, go ahead and take a look. It's going to give you a bit of perspective in terms of overall how happy your customers are with you. So that's number 6, Net Promoter Score. Moving on, number 5. All right, so number 5 is your survey responses, the ability to analyze and also get insights from them. So the survey response statistics are displayed in a summary pane once you start to get those responses in. So that's going to be something that you can see at the top of the page when you're reviewing those responses. So the list of the survey responses are displayed below the statistics at the top. So what you're able to see in the statistics, that's hard to say, you're able to see the average completion time. So how long does it take on average for a respondent to open the survey to actually submit the survey? So how long is that completion time? The response ratio, so that's the ratio of the closed invites to the total number of people that you have invited. That one might be a little bit off depending on how you're actually sharing your survey. But if you're emailing them all of them will have an invite, so you can get that response ratio. Responses trend, so that's the number of survey responses typically received per day. And then you've got NPS distribution, so that's the distribution of the Net Promoter Score. So that's going to show the promoters, detractors, and passive people that we just talked about in the last one. So for that Net Promoter Score question, how is that distributed between those 3 types? You've also got the option to be able to go ahead and filter the responses. So filtering, you're able to use to look for tracked and anonymous filters to filter the responses. You can look based on a date range. So you can select 30 days, 90 days, or you can look at a custom date range. So depending on how long your survey's been going on for, that might be useful if it's a survey that you have set up and have used for months and months. You might want to be able to drill in and look based on a specific date range. Then what you're going to find is when you actually scroll down and look at all of the responses, you can open up the individual responses and see how long it took for each individual person to complete the survey. You'll be able to see the Net Promoter Score type for that person if you had an NPS question on there, and also the sentiment. So we'll talk about sentiment in just a moment. You can also see the individual responses to each question in the survey, so you can really drill down into the results from within Forms Pro. If there's sufficient responses to a survey, the insights are also generated, which will give you a correlation between the questions and the sentiments of the respondents. So with the sentiment, basically that's showing us, is somebody being positive, or are they being negative in terms of their feedback? So we're going to be able to see the average sentiment score and also a word cloud that will give you positive words and negative words that have been used. Now, obviously, that's going to depend on the type of questions that you have on your survey. So if you have a text box where you've said, please give us more information about how you think we did, and somebody says, the service is terrible, you've done a really poor job, the product's really bad, blah, 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 and it's negative, awful, terrible, bad, whatever, those are all negative words. So the sentiment for that specific feedback will be negative. If somebody says, I love you guys, you are so fantastic, time and time again, you give great service, all positive words, so that sentiment score is going to be very high on the positive scale. We've also got the ability to see association insights. So that displays the correlation between one or more questions in a survey. So maybe giving patterns. So that could be something like 25% of people that said they were happy with you were also detractors. Okay, well that doesn't add up. So it gives you a bit in terms of like associating things together to look for things that are like, oh, okay, well that doesn't make sense, or oh, okay, well that does make sense. So maybe 50% of the people that gave great feedback are promoters. Okay, then that's fine. We don't need to dig into that too much further because it makes sense. So there's a lot that you can use that's built in already that's going to create this this level of insight and sentiment, and be able to see those responses and get some statistics directly from within your Forms Pro survey. So that's a really cool feature, definitely. All right, so that was number 5, response, survey response analysis and insights. Number 4. All right, number 4 could have easily been number 10 because I could have started with it. It could also be number 1 because to me I think it's one of the coolest things about it and one of the things that makes Forms Pro so exciting. And that is the Common Data Service. So if you're not aware or don't understand what Common Data Service is, which is commonly known as CDS, it's a database that basically includes a base set of standard entities. So if you've ever created Power Apps, or you've already started delving into Forms Pro, or you have Dynamics 365 for customer engagement, these are things that are basically built on CDS. So the standard entities, those would include things like an account record, contact, currency, address. Those are standard entities that would exist in the Common Data Service. Dynamics 365 customer engagement, if you're using that data is also stored in CDS, and that's going to have things like that the standard CDS doesn't have. So things like cases, things like quotes or invoices, that kind of thing. So you have the ability and the power, if you've ever created a model-driven app for Dynamics 365 CE, if you're using, hopefully, people listening are using the latest UCI, so you've got the classic interface and you've got the latest, most current, up-to-date one. If you've built a model-driven app, or even if you haven't and you're using the out-of-the-box ones that come with it, the Sales Hub, the Customer Service Hub, that's a model-driven app. And you could add in entities into an app, and that's all run on CDS. So I've created a blog and a video that talks through how to add entities into your apps. But why is this cool in terms of Forms Pro? Well, yeah, the Forms Pro data is also stored in CDS. So hopefully that's starting to have you piece things together now to where you can think, oh, okay, well, so you've got CDS, Dynamics 365 customer engagements on CDS, Forms Pro's on CDS. Yes, you basically get the data from Forms Pro into CDS, and then you can store it and show it within your Dynamics 365 environment. That is, to me, one of the coolest things. So not only is it cool because in my world I am a CRM person, so it's cool to me, but it also means that if you're using other products and not necessarily Dynamics 365, you could also do the same thing with your Forms Pro responses and be able to pull them into a model-driven app. Very, very cool. So the fact that all of your data stored in CDS means that in CDS means you're going to be able to create powerful and impactful applications for your organization. So the entities for Forms Pro, if you were to go to web.powerapps.com and you were to go ahead and look at your default environment and just type in the word forms, what you'll see is quite a few entities in there, and that's all related to Forms Pro. So you've got the Forms Pro survey, so that's when you actually create the survey itself. Forms Pro survey email template, Forms Pro survey invite, Forms Pro survey questions, that's all of the individual questions. Forms Pro survey question response, so when someone responds to a specific question, that gets stored. Forms Pro survey response, which is the actual Megan Walker filled out a survey, that's the entirety of it. And then also Forms Pro unsubscribed recipient, so if somebody clicks on a link at the bottom to unsubscribe from getting surveys, you will get that stored in CDS as well. So common data service, really, really cool that Forms Pro data is stored there, just really for the fact that you can then tie it in with so many other things. So like I said, even though I've got it at number 4, Common Data Service could really have been the first one that I'd started with, or could have been number 1 because it's the coolest part about it in my humble opinion. Alright, so that's number 4. Let's move on to number 3. Number 3. This is, to me, another one that could have been at any, pretty much it could have been one of the first ones I started with, could have been one of the last ones, because again, this is really cool. And that's Microsoft Flow and the connectors for Forms Pro. But I'm also going to talk about connectors for Forms as well. So if you've not used Microsoft Flow before, but you want to start using Forms Pro, I think you will quickly find that you will start using Flow and start learning more about it, or start realizing that you need to learn more about it, because Microsoft Flow is going to completely extend the possibility of what you can do with your Forms Pro data. So you've got a Forms Pro connector. Now currently there are no triggers. Now a trigger is basically what allows you to start and kick off that flow. So there's currently no triggers. There's 2 actions. The actions are to create an invitation. So that creates a survey invitation and basically gives you a personalized invitation link. So it gives you a URL that you can then use to put into an email to send out to somebody. And we'll talk in a moment why that's important. The other action is to send a survey. So that action sends a survey to a specified list of recipients. It creates a survey invitation for each of those recipients. So they sound quite similar, but the send a survey uses the Forms Pro email capability and sends out using your email templates that you would create within Forms Pro itself. That means that the email, you've got no ability to determine what email address it comes from. Creating an invitation, however, because you're doing that from within Flow, you can then have a step that allows you to create an email that gets sent out from your own email address. So from an organization perspective, I would imagine for the most part that is what people are going to use, because I want my email to come from support@meganvwalker.com, not a Microsoft Forms Pro email address. Now, even though we're talking about Forms Pro and not Forms, you will need to use the Forms connector and the action to get the response details. So that action retrieves a form response so that you can actually find the answers to what is your first name, what is your last name, tell us what you think about this, blah, blah, blah. Those responses and those individual answers to your questions. You're going to need to use that action from the Forms connector. There is also a trigger for the Forms connector, and that trigger is basically when a form response is received. However, I would use the CDS trigger of when a new record is created, with that record being a new survey response record, rather than using the forms trigger. You're just going to have more flexibility of doing that. So what else can you do with flow, or what can you do in terms of sending and creating these flows? So there are 5 built-in flow templates that come with Forms Pro. So when you go to send your survey and you pick Microsoft Flow as the option, you can use one of the templates. So those templates are sending a survey when a case is resolved in D365 CE, sending a survey when a lead is qualified in D365 CE, send a survey when a button is clicked in Power Apps, send a survey when an order is fulfilled in D365 CE, or send a survey when a case is closed in Salesforce. However, you don't have to use a template. You can create your own flows. So some of the examples that I've got on my website that I've gone through and done blog posts and videos on: create an invitation when a case is closed, get a response from an embedded survey. So we talked about putting surveys on websites. Send out multilingual email templates. So we talked about those multilingual surveys and the ability to create those, but how the email templates will all be in one language. You will have to create one template for each language. So you would use a flow to be able to check and say, right, well, I'm sending this out, check the contact record and have a field on the contact for language. Check if they're English, send them this email with this a survey. Check if not, is it French? Send them this email template with this survey. If not, is it German, and so on. So you'll be able to send out those email templates with different languages. You can also check for duplicates and link survey responses to existing contacts or leads, and also use Flow to calculate your overall Net Promoter Score. So all of those, if you're interested in any of flows like that, you can go ahead and look at my site and you'll be able to see blogs and videos that will walk you through step by step. So Microsoft Flow, awesome. If you haven't used it before, you're gonna start using it if you use Forms Pro. So go ahead and dig in. There's a lot of great content out there from other people, and you should be able to do some really powerful things by combining Flow with Forms Pro. Alright, so number 1, like I said, the order in which I've put these, it doesn't mean that this is the best one by far, but it's something that then follows in and ties in with a lot of the other areas. So we just talked about the ability to trigger surveys to go out based on things like closing cases. We've talked about Microsoft Flow. We talked about so many other things. This one is adding personalization to surveys. So by default, you've got the first name and you've got the last name as fields that will allow you to add them into a survey and also add them into an email template. Now this is great if you are sharing the survey in any method other than something that would potentially lead to an anonymous response. So by that I mean if you just share the link or you give someone a QR code, there's no context. We don't know who that contact is. So if I share the survey by using Flow based on the closure of a case, then what I can do is I can populate the first name field with the first name from the contact entity. I can populate the last name and so on. So we can add the first name by adding personalization into the email, and we can put that also in the survey. So instead of a customer just getting an email that says, hey, we've closed your case, let us know what you think, we could say, hi Megan, we just recently closed a case, please let us know what you think. So it's important to personalize your communication with your customers to make them feel like it's that they're important rather than just being a randomly generated survey request. So again, when we send surveys using Flow or from Office 365 or D365, then we can show the name, we can show it in the survey and also the email. Now what we also have the ability to do, which to me is really, really cool, is to create new personalization fields. So from that ellipsis that I've talked about on your survey, where you've got the multilingual surveys, you've also got the branching rules, you also have personalization as an option. So if you go in there, you can create new fields that you can then add onto your survey. So You can go in and create a new one and just type case number. You can go ahead and add one for case title or support rep. What you then need to do is from within first of all, within the survey, you then go to where you want those fields to be displayed. So when I receive an email that says, Megan, can you complete this survey? And I click on the link and I'm taken to the survey, it will say, hi, Megan. What I really want it to then say is, we recently closed a case for you. And then we can put in brackets, the case number hyphen the case title. So Megan knows exactly which case that I'm filling out my response on. I might be somebody that's responsible for 10 cases a week or maybe even more. So when I get a survey that asks me to fill out a response based on a case and I don't know what case it is, it's pointless. So once I've created those and I've added them onto the survey, I then need to go into the flow that I'm using to send that out with. And I'm basically going to, when I do the send a survey step or the process where I'm basically creating an invite to send out a survey, I need to then, well, what I'll see is I'll have fields that are open and empty for the case number, the case title, and the support rep that I just created. I then use my trigger step where it says when a case is closed, and I get the fields for the case number and the case title, and I populate those into those empty values. The support rep, what I'll need to do is I'll need to get the user based on the owner of the case, and then I can pull in the full name of the support rep. Otherwise, if I just pull in the owner of the case, it'll just give me the GUID string, which obviously isn't going to look very pretty. So the ability to personalize these surveys is awesome because I can share information within that survey, within the email and the survey itself, that then makes the customer know or shows the customer that I know exactly what I'm asking them for, they know exactly what they're being asked for, and it just makes that process a lot smoother. So adding personalization to surveys, really cool that we can do that. Okay, I bet you thought we were finished, but I've got a bonus one. Right, so if you followed my blog for any length of time, again, you will know that I love emojis. Well, they're okay, but I've been known for doing stuff with emojis ever since January 2018 when I know it. I might have not been the only one that discovered it, but I wrote about how you can take an emoji and put it into an option set within Dynamics 365 customer engagement. So ever since then, it's something that I always check out on each new area of the Microsoft Power Platform, Microsoft Stack, and I dig into it to see if emojis can be put into something else. So I had to do it with Microsoft Forms Pro too, right? Can they be added? How do they look? Is it practical? So I took a look, and yes, you can add emojis into your Forms Pro surveys. If you didn't already know this, you can press the Windows key on your keyboard and the full stop or the period at the same time, and that will bring up an emoji keyboard. If you've not done it before, try it because it's cool. And if you're a Mac user, use the keyboard shortcut Command Control Spacebar, and you'll be able to access emojis that way. So it's a little bit of fun, but it can be a great visual indicator. So when you're creating your question, if you have a question with choices, so let's say you've got something where you want to know how happy is the person with how the case was closed, you could use faces that are smiley all the way down to sad in varying degrees of that face. You could use thumbs up, thumbs down, high five, whatever. It could be a no entry sign for something or a green tick to show something else. So I did an example of one on my website, and it was something about a pet shop. And so I used a question that was, what pets do you have? Dog, cats, goldfish, whatever. So it is a bit of fun, but again, consider it could be a really good visual indicator depending on who that survey is going out to. So keep it in mind, bit of fun, but that's our bonus feature and business benefit. So hope you've enjoyed this. I have had a lot of fun putting this together. And yeah, I think Forms Pro is awesome. So hopefully you've heard at least one thing that makes you want to go ahead and check out Forms Pro. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And feel free to email info@crmmvppodcast.com with questions, suggestions, or comments about this episode or any of our past episodes, which you can find online at crmmvppodcast.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.